Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a whole stack of sources today, and they all center on something, well, absolutely critical: the future of renewable energy.
Yeah. It's a topic that's really amplified recently, isn't it? I mean, the whole global conversation around climate change, carbon neutrality.
That's everywhere now.
Exactly. It's become so much more prominent, even just compared to, say, 5 or 10 years ago. And these sources, they really reflect that urgency, that focus.
Absolutely. And our mission here in this deep dive is basically to navigate these sources,
Oh,
pull out the most crucial bits, the insights, the
yeah,
projections,
cut through the noise.
right, and build a clear picture of where clean energy stands right now and maybe more importantly, where it's headed. Think of it as getting you a fast track,
Mm-hmm.
to being well informed on this massive global energy shift.
Hmm.
So let's start with the current landscape. What are the sources telling us about renewable energy's contribution today?
Right now, renewable energy sources account for about 26% of the world's electricity. So that's the starting point.
Okay, 26%.
But the real story these sources are highlighting is the sheer scale of the growth we're seeing or starting to see.
Growth indeed. I saw one source projecting a pretty staggering 50% expansion in renewable power capacity between 2019 and 2024.
50%.
Yeah, mainly driven by solar, wind, and hydropower projects. And another one looking specifically at electricity generation predicts renewables hitting 30% of the global share by 2024.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is that this surge actually follows a bit of a slowdown period globally.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the sources seem to attribute this resurgence to a couple of powerful forces working together.
Mhm.
One is the rapidly falling technology costs.
Right, that makes sense.
And the other is just this definite rise in environmental concerns worldwide. People are demanding change.
And the scale of that growth that really jumped out at me, they predict overall renewable electricity capacity is set to grow by a whopping 1,200 gigawatts by 2024,
Wow, 1,200.
which they point out is equivalent to the total installed electricity capacity of the entire United States right now.
That really puts the speed of this transition into perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so where is all this growth actually happening? Let's maybe break down the key technologies driving this shift, starting with um, one source called the superstar, solar power.
Yeah, solar. It's consistently identified across these sources as the fastest growing energy source globally.
Right.
We're talking huge annual increases like 100 gigawatts added in 2018 alone.
And the engine behind that acceleration
Lit-
seems to be cost, right?
Absolutely. The sources show solar PV costs, that's photovoltaic, turning light directly into electricity.
Right.
Those costs declined by 13% in 2018, and they're expected to drop another 15% to 35% by 2024.
Which is massive. I mean, when the cost drops that dramatically, adoption just becomes incredibly attractive.
Exactly. And it's sort of uniquely accessible, too. Unlike, say, a huge dam or needing a really specific windy location, solar can go on a rooftop.
Right. Anyone can potentially do it.
It empowers individuals, generate their own power, cut bills, reduce their carbon footprint. Plus, the sun's schedule is, pretty predictable, which offers a different kind of reliability compared to some other sources.
The projected capacity growth is pretty mind-boggling, too. The world's solar capacity could grow by 600 gigawatts by 2024.
600 gigawatts.
That's nearly double Japan's entire installed electricity capacity today, just from solar expansion.
And we're seeing this already in the numbers, the actual installations. The UK crossed 1 million solar installations back in 2018.
Australia hit 2 million that same year.
Right. And the US is apparently on track to double its installations to 4 million, maybe by 2023, 2024.
And this growth isn't just about homeowners, is it? I mean, commercial, industrial?
No, definitely not. The sources project significant expansion there, too. While China is expected to lead in overall installed capacity in those sectors.
Right.
Countries like Australia, Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, they're showing incredibly strong growth on a per capita basis, really punching above their weight, you could say.
Now, you mentioned predictability, but there's still that challenge with solar variability, right? The sun isn't always shining.
True. That's the classic challenge. But the sources discuss how advanced solar plants are tackling this. They're using technologies like integrated storage, batteries, basically,
Okay, storage helps.
and also higher DC to AC ratios, which essentially means they're oversizing the panel capacity relative to the inverter.
What does that do?
Well, it lets them capture more energy, even in sort of less than ideal conditions, like cloudy days. It helps provide a more consistent output over longer periods. smooth things out a bit.
And I imagine government support plays a massive role here.
Oh, huge. Incentive schemes, smart regulation, transforming building codes, they're all seen as crucial. California mandating solar panels on new homes after 2020 is like a prime example mentioned.
Yeah, that's a big step.
Though it's worth noting the obvious limitation, isn't it? When it's dark, there's no power. And this presents a particular challenge for regions with very short, dark winter days. Think Denmark, places like that. Storage becomes even more critical there.
Okay, moving on. Another technology seeing, well, explosive growth is wind power. The numbers here are also pretty impressive.
They really are. The U.S., for instance, saw something like a 431% increase in wind energy production and capacity just between 2007 and 2017.
Wow, 400%.
Yeah, that averages out to about an 18% increase every single year.
And the sources predict that trajectory is continuing.
Seems so. Onshore wind capacity is expected to jump by 57% by 2024. And offshore wind, well, that's forecast to almost triple in capacity.
Triple. Okay, where's that happening?
Well, the U.S. and China are leading the annual additions in onshore wind, often spurred by, policy changes or development cycles.
Right.
In offshore wind, the EU holds about half of the projected global expansion, but China is actually leading country-by-country deployment. And we're also anticipating the first significant large-scale offshore projects coming online soon in the U.S. That's a big development.
I found it interesting that Japan is looking seriously at offshore wind, too. Specifically, experimenting with installing turbines to replace nuclear reactors after the Fukushima disaster.
Yeah, that's a fascinating angle. Apparently, legislative changes there are aimed at making that development pathway clearer and, importantly, more cost-effective.
Now, what's really interesting about wind, beyond just the clean energy aspect, is the significant economic impact, right?
Yeah.
Especially in rural areas.
Absolutely. That's a key point in the sources. It provides local employment, funding, stable income for farmers and ranchers through land leases.
Right, leasing their land.
Exactly. And it can even generate revenue for local schools. There's this example from Sheldon, New York, where revenue from a wind farm reportedly eliminated local taxes for 8 years.
8 years. No local taxes.
Yeah.
That's a tangible benefit you can really feel directly in a community.
Definitely. And the job creation isn't just super local either. Wind turbine service technician is listed as one of the fastest growing occupations in the U.S.
I've heard that.
And there's manufacturing happening across, I think, 43 states building parts for these turbines. Plus, the sources note wind farms have been seen as really reliable, low-risk investments, even described as sort of havens during recent economic uncertainty.
Okay, so lots of upsides. But are there challenges?
Yes, despite the advantages and strong growth, the sources do point to some lingering challenges. Things like integrating large amounts of variable wind power into the existing grid.
Grid integration is always tricky.
It is. Securing financing for these really large projects can still be complex, and maybe surprisingly, social acceptance can still be an obstacle in some communities. The not in my backyard kind of issue.
Okay, next up, hydropower. This is kind of the veteran of the renewable world, isn't it?
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Hydropower is currently the most established renewable energy source globally, and it's often considered very reliable.
Why reliable?
Because you can control the flow of water relatively easily, you see. You can store water behind the dam and release it to generate power when it's needed most, matching demand.
Gotcha. So what's the growth outlook here?
The sources project about a 9% growth in hydropower capacity by 2024, with China, India, and Brazil leading that expansion.
9%. Seems smaller than wind or solar.
It is. And actually, a significant chunk of that global growth, about 25% of it, is expected from just 3 massive projects.
3 projects.
Yeah, the Wudongdi and Baihetan dams in China and the Grand Renaissance project in Ethiopia. Mega projects.
But the sources also mention a bit of a slowdown in some major markets like China and Brazil, despite that potential. What's happening there?
Yeah, it seems linked to rising investment costs. It's just becoming harder to find new, really economically viable sites for large dams.
Makes sense. The best spots might already be taken.
Exactly. Plus, there are often significant extra expenses needed now to address the social and environmental impacts associated with these huge projects. People are much more aware of those downsides.
Right, the impact on ecosystems and communities.
Precisely. However, the sources do say there's still a lot of untapped potential. They anticipate annual additions expanding in regions like sub-Saharan Africa and also the ASEAN countries as they look to meet growing power demands.
Okay, finally, let's touch quickly on geothermal energy tapping into the heat beneath our feet.
Right, geothermal. The market is definitely growing. The sources point to the U.S. market for geothermal heat pumps, the systems that use stable ground temperature for heating and cooling homes.
Yes, he knows.
That market is expected to exceed $2 billion by 2024, driven by demand for efficiency and, again, changing building codes.
And what about actual power generation capacity?
Overall, geothermal capacity is projected to grow by about 28% by 2024.
Okay, 28%. Where's that happening?
Well, what's fascinating here is where that growth is concentrated. Asia, specifically Indonesia and the Philippines, is slated to account for a third of the global expansion.
A third. Wow.
And get this, Kenya's geothermal capacity is actually projected to overtake Iceland's during this period.
Really? Overtake Iceland. You always think of Iceland for geothermal.
I know, right? But Kenya is really pushing forward. And looking further out, the sources predict geothermal solutions could generate maybe 8.5% of all U.S. electricity by 2050, with a considerable increase expected in the commercial market as well.
So, okay, we've covered the current status, the really rapid growth, the outlook for the major renewable sources. This all points to a massive shift. But maybe we should zoom out again. Why is this transition so profoundly crucial for our future? What's the big picture here?
Yeah, the case the sources make is pretty compelling, and it's multifaceted. I mean, at the core, fossil fuels just come with immense costs, right?
Like what?
Well, health problems for people and the planet, a major contribution to global warming, obviously, and the simple fact that they are finite resources. They will eventually run out.
So we basically have to find alternatives.
We do. And the benefits of renewables go way beyond just generating clean power. That's a key takeaway.
Okay, like what else?
Well, improved global health is a huge one, often overlooked. Breathing air polluted by burning fossil fuels. It's a major cause of respiratory diseases.
Right.
The World Health Organization estimates something like 7 million people die prematurely each year just due to air pollution. Renewables essentially eliminate the source of those harmful emissions.
That's staggering. And the environmental protection aspect.
Massive, yeah. The sources highlight how wind turbines, for example, avoided emissions equivalent to maybe 42 million cars in 2019 alone.
Wow.
Because renewables don't burn fuel, they cut out pollutants like CO2, obviously, but also things like sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide. And they reduce the need for destructive mining practices, which helps ecosystems recover, prevents further damage, allows the ozone layer to heal, makes our air pure.
It's all connected.
It really is. And there's also the connection to extreme weather. Fossil fuel plants often require huge amounts of water, which contributes to scarcity.
Didn't think about the water usage.
Yeah, and climate change itself, fueled by emissions, increases the frequency and intensity of damaging floods and other extreme events. So, shifting to renewables is presented as this urgent, necessary part of adapting to and mitigating those impacts.
And finally, we touched on this with wind power, but the economic side.
Right, significant economic stability and investment potential. Renewables are seen as promoting economic growth, providing stable revenue streams, and they're increasingly viewed as low-risk, reliable investments. They really are described as central to addressing greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, and energy access globally. It's a triple win, in a way.
Okay, so this all leads us to maybe the biggest question the sources tackle head-on. Is running the entire world on renewable energy? Is that actually possible?
The short answer from the sources seems to be yes.
Yeah.
Technically possible.
Really, 100%.
Technically, yes. Though they are careful to state it's obviously a really complex transition. It will take time, and it will require varied approaches depending on the country, the resources.
And it sounds like some countries are certainly better positioned for this than others, right?
Oh, definitely. An oil-dependent nation like Saudi Arabia, for example, has incredible solar resources. So theoretically, they could aim for 100% solar by, say, 2040.
But would they?
Well, the sources acknowledge the potential political or economic reluctance there, given their reliance on oil wealth. It's complicated. Conversely, a country like Finland, with much less sunlight in winter, might face a harder path, or at least a very different path, maybe relying more on wind or other sources, plus storage and interconnection.
So let's peer into the crystal ball a bit based on these sources. What picture is painted for energy in, say, 2050, if countries actually achieve their stated goals?
Well, the picture is one where the world is largely powered by renewable energy. Many countries will have reached carbon neutrality.
Carbon neutral, meaning they balance the greenhouse gases they produce with the amount they remove?
Exactly. Balancing the books, so to speak. It really sounds like a future where electricity becomes the dominant energy carrier, powering vehicles, heating homes.
And using fossil fuels might just seem archaic.
Yeah, like a relic of the past. That's the vision painted.
Wow. Okay, this deep dive has made it incredibly clear that we are really at a pivotal moment for renewable energy. These technologies aren't just about generating power anymore, are they?
No, not at all. They're at the heart of transforming how we address climate change, clean up our air, ensure energy access for everyone. The sources highlight just incredible growth and potential.
It's definitely a complex transition, as you said. There are challenges, grid integration, project costs, social acceptance. We covered those.
But the overall trajectory, according to the data presented in these sources, seems pretty undeniable. The momentum is there.
So as you, our listener, reflect on all these trends and impacts we've explored today, maybe think about this. Given these projections, all the shifts underway, what single aspect of this energy transformation do you think will have the most significant, tangible impact on your daily life in the years to come? Something to mull over.